And the next panel is coming, the panel Digital Trust Economy, Cost of Compliance or Source of Competitive Advantage. In a moment, we will have the moderator, Kacper Dąbrowski, on stage from Big Tech Enterprise, and the speakers are going to be Kamil Mroczka from Erste Bank, Robert Leksiński from Totalizator Sportowy, Tomasz Chomicki from Samsung Electronics, Jacek from Wrocław University of Science and Technology. I'm giving you the floor, gentlemen. A round of applause, of course, of course.
Dzień dobry Państwu. Kacper Dąbrowski, bardzo mi miło tutaj być.
Good afternoon. My name is Kacper Dąbrowski. Thank you very much for the invitation. I was wondering how to start this panel. What is the context that was presented? Maybe it's worth noting that we live in times where we faster accept cookies in our browsers than we read things in our restaurant menu, and then we hope that nobody will profile us. On the other hand, we can look at it differently. We're using mobile phones, and in the context of digital trust and economy, we can look at the fact how important is my digital data? Where's the privacy? Well, how much is it in Polish operators? It's 5 zlotys per person. This is the usually the discount you get from the mobile phone provider to enable your personal data. It's 5 zlotys gross, of course. So many presentations mentioned it depends. Let's not also try to aim at that here. And please that's why I would like to ask the speakers to be specific. Compliance costs, competitive advantage. Could you give us could you give us an attempt to answer the question from the title? Digital trust, is it cost of compliance or source of competitive advantage? In Totalizator Sportowy, it is the most important element of our business. Trust is everything here. In terms of gambling operators, lottery operators, like us, everyone needs to believe that if they win, well, tomorrow, for example, you can win 500 million zlotys in Eurojackpot. Please feel free to buy a coupon, a lottery ticket. So we will pay out the money. You need to trust us that we will. That if you win the game, everything will be fine. You also need to believe us that if you register online, then your data is not going to be leaked, even though we are not a bank. You also need to trust us that with the money you leave with us, we will do something good. And for example, thanks to you, we will create a new stadium, sports people will be supported, so it makes sense in general. And I think this mutual relation is the basis of trust. We get an agreement and we believe each other that it will work in a way we agreed on. So when talking about digital trust, I think it's more difficult because we don't look each other in the eye. We see, we communicate only using digital means, bots. We speak with AI as well today. So how to achieve all that? How to make our brain believe the other side? It's difficult, I agree. It's a funny and not so funny question. Let me add context. Professor, you were my lecturer, so it's my great satisfaction for me to ask you questions for once, for a change. Yeah, well, it's interesting to show the relations. exemplify the relations. I'm representing a university. I have represented different entities, but this time a university. We all have been students. Majority, I think, we have been students. Some of us are on the other side now. We are responsible for things like that, and the mutual trust, can it be without limitations? Because the diplomas that we give out, or maybe grant is a better word, provide a certain certification. It's a confirmation of skills. On the other hand, would you say that a person who comes to the exam is the person who should come? Do they know, really? Do they have the knowledge in their minds or on some digital carrier? You might say it doesn't matter if they pass the exam. Well, there are professions in which I would prefer my professionalist, my specialist, to know things rather than to use a cheat sheet. So verification is also important in this context. And the possibility of building trust is from the perspective of a university, but also from the perspective of a graduate. So all the stakeholders using that entity, very important. How to, conduct a credible examination. For example, using digital platforms. This is a challenge that we are still facing, and there is no single answer to that. But definitely it can be a benefit as well, can be an advantage as well. Having tools like that, the possibility of verifying your students is an advantage, but also a great cost at the same time. To refer to what was mentioned by Mr. Oko, I will call him President Jacek, because we've known each other for quite some time, and these issues related to certifications, well, Jacek was presenting in a different context as a president of Electronic Communication Office. But I will talk about things related to certification. It might sound colloquially, but I represent a big player, Samsung Electronics, as a fragment of a bigger company, of course, because I represent Poland. So looking from this perspective, it's a great cost. Nobody would be surprised, I'm sure, that introducing certain regulations and certifications require some expense, both in terms of manpower and funds. And there are business areas that allow to provide a service only when you have a particular compliance or certification, what Jacek said. Without them, we would not be able to function. If you want to sell, for example, to the military today, you need to go through particular certification. For example, in terms of confidential information processing, you need to have a certificate of being able to access confidential information. If you want to sell medical equipment, you also need to have certificates, and so on. So sometimes it's an advantage, but it's also a cost, for sure. So how to make this business environment friendly to us? And I think this is what I'm lacking, promoting solutions that are not so strictly regulated, that are about certification, that are related to certification. I think I'm in the most regulated industry, banking sector. I would not look at it as cost, but as an investment. So, of course, every investment requires some expenses, some cost, but that should build your competitive advantage. And that will relate to financial market entities, banks in particular. These are public trust institutions, right? So this burden of responsibility here is very strongly emphasized here. And it's, of course, defined by the regulations. Because to be able to collect the deposits, you need to be a bank. We are not a loan company, so there is a number of regulations here you need to fulfill. A very important aspect in our activity, but also, do we really need to invest here? Because among the big banks, there is like 500 cooperative banks that don't offer such services that are offered by big banking groups, usually international or capital groups. So, of course, certain activities are consolidated on the levels of associations, let's say, to provide high-quality services. Because, of course, in here, it's key to trust the institution, especially financial institution. If we had a data leak, for example, that was mentioned by Paulina, this, of course, is a reputational risk that is priced particularly on the stock market even. So that may contribute or impact the financial results. And of course, we need to connect it to the legal context, because the paradigm of protecting a consumer on the financial market in the last couple of years has been changed or changing drastically in the last couple of years. So the financial entities and institutions have the responsibility of protecting, let's say, this lay person that deals with financial situation. So in other words, in colloquial words, the user of our services should not, recipient should not, of our services should not really have to think about using our services. But I think it's a wrong way to go. The user of our services should have skills, competences of moving around this market. For me, it's key. Building that educational ecosystem should be a very important element, because when both sides can communicate with each other, can be efficient in it, then we can obtain these results, these effects of synergy. I think this is a key point for further discussion. A highlight that needs to be a thing that needs to be highlighted. I was trying to get an answer from you, a direct answer. I haven't, so let's keep on trying. Compliance in practice. I would like to understand, also given my context and preference, for us to speak about specifics, as numbers, situations, when or where, realistically speaking, these issues of digital trust brought some positive ROI. Or what were the costs related to it? A real life example, Accessibility Act, sorry. Compliance in the bank is treated as a second line of defense, let's say, that keeps on nitpicking and caring about details. I think we are past this element already. It's a great idea. Let's write it down and let's keep on thinking. I think that we're past that stage. Right now, we're talking about, on one hand, data-driven compliance, and then compliance by design. So we participate in preparing certain concepts from the very beginning to build solutions that will then allow us to obtain that business synergy result. I have recently talked with you about this, whether this is something that is going to be important or not. If the regulator can impose a 2% of group result, fine. So in financial groups, that could be billions of zlotys, especially in the financial group that I have been part of. So it is referred to the consolidated report very often. So we're talking about tens or hundreds of millions even. If with our actions, we can lead to the situation when these inconsistencies will not be present, then, well, the result is going to be significant. Fine is a lost, let's say, profit, and that, of course, is influenced by the decrease in reputation. Of course, another thing that is not really quantifiable, then simplifying communication with the client is important here. If the client got 50 pages of a contract and they needed at least a PhD in law, civil law, or banking law to understand what is there, and then 3 legal advisors, and then today we're talking about plain language concept, then it turns out that the number of claims or complaints from the client is just shorter. So it is measurable, quantifiable, of course. And I think this is key for me, that for every case, every digital case that we talked about, we should build business justification. So we need to be able to measure that and respond, what is the real value for the business that it brings? Because this is why is it designed. Compliance, of course, has the perspective of a regulatory organization, but it should also take client's perspective to care broader, not for its own interests. So this concept of building these 3 lines of defense was the rationale behind it, at least.
And there are other examples, especially if we talk about compliance in terms of cyber risk, legal risk, allowed to identify, like Professor Tagan says, by combining different dots, different threats in terms of deepfake. So these are 2 competing paradigms, security and usability. The higher the usability, the lower the security, especially the time of opening the
100 sekund, bo ja do kolegów podejdę, żeby to zrozumieć. Przy dużych grupach finansowych, gdzie mamy tam 15 beneficjentów rzeczywistych pod fundacjami podpiętych, że to się da w to...
Of course, that's a joke, but today the structure is broad, well developed, so we need to provide evidence to defend it from the legal framework perspective. But if we increase the security, and that was discussed before, the client, the customer will need to show himself in the department outlet physically. I am the operator, but I can tell you one more thing, a joke. We live in times where we use many different services, even though
I tylko agenci AI w ogóle to jest jedyne rozwiązanie. A dzisiaj padło ze sceny REST API. Cały czas się używa. Ale jest taka firma
but there is a taxi company,
która dawała możliwość stworzenia konta kierowcom u siebie, tak jak w różnych firmach jest. I kiedyś ktoś zamiast swojego zdjęcia z kierowców wrzucił zdjęcie balona. No i aplikacja stwierdziła, że to jest po prostu łysy kierowca. I teraz jakby w tym kontekście, patrząc też na zaufanie do produktu,
looking at the trust to the services, we need to also talk about the business and then
możemy zacząć od totalizatora. Jak to wygląda z waszej perspektywy? Czyli jak jest z tą szybkością? Może jakiś właśnie ciekawy taki przypadek?
Can you tell us about something in terms of compliance? If we talk about compliance, we have quite a particular situation because we need to look after AML issues, identification issues, but we're also obliged to
czyli proces zapisany w ustawie o grach hazardowych, gdzie my jesteśmy zobowiązani do tego,
and we are obliged by that act to mitigate the risk of using our gambling products. Let's say. So that's the level of compliance which is a part of our company's DNA.
Co to znaczy?
What does it mean?
To znaczy, że jeżeli macie system CRM-owy,
if you have a CRM system and CRM team,
normalnie zespół CRM-owy buduje
such
kampanię, żeby podgrzewać klientów, prawda? A teraz wyobraźcie sobie, że ja mam drugi
imagine that I have another CRM team
o to, żeby schładzać tych klientów.
that in a way cools down the clients. So we keep these players in the state of excitement because we sell entertainment, right? But we also need to look after the fact that our products and interaction with our product is not detrimental to consumers. And that requires particular skills, teams, and mixing all these competences. We verify our communication in terms of fair game, fair gambling. We build mechanisms of heating and cooling down at the same time when we develop our campaigns. And moreover, we build teams which deep dive into our customers. They examine particular individuals appointed by algorithms to be potentially risky for us and also threatened with our products to say, okay, this is a CEO of a big corporation and he can afford to spend dozens of złotys in a casino at the weekend. But on the other hand, we have another guy, and for that person 1,000 Polish złotys is even too much. And this is our responsibility.
I tak naprawdę łapanie tych wszystkich elementów czasami
combining all these elements sometimes leads to schizophrenia when we discuss strategic aspects. However, we conducted a study this year, and we found that the customer we took care after, we learned the client to use many different mechanisms as self-exclusion. We have special budget calculator course to verify how much you can spend on gambling, and the clients that felt taken care of are making breaks for 1 year even, and they then come back to us. They play less, but they are consistent. So we are on the market for 70 years, and we want to build relations with customers for the next 70 years, not for 6 months. That's why we don't want our customers to spend just maximum amount of money in a short possible time, but to stay with us and be entertained by our company as long as possible. So that schizophrenia we have in the company is to build relations, hot and cold relations, like in human relation. We are not only nice to each other, sometimes we need to we need to criticize sometimes others. We need to set boundaries. That's why we have long and good relation with the player,
dziękuję.
with the
A
user.
jak to w Samsungu w takim razie?
Okay, and Samsung
ma dużo wyzwań, bo ma dużo produktów, ale to jest też
but that's, I think, quite combined because it's difficult to separate compliance from the world of implementing business operations. So I will give you several numbers to
do Samsunga. 65% konsumentów zrezygnowałoby z usług przy utracie reputalności danych. Ja patrzę na Thales Digital Trust Index.
And another number, 86% of consumers
oczekuje co najmniej podstawowych praw dotyczących prywatności i to jest raport z 2025 roku. I co jest też niezwykle ciekawe,
what is also interesting from the Samsung point of view, 86% of consumers gladly and willingly cooperate with transparent companies in terms of data sharing. How does it look like from Samsung perspective? Let's imagine a situation when we have an incident. The compliance was broken. Then in a very automatic geometrical way it affects the results of our sales. That's why we as an organization focus on the process to make it as best prepared as possible. So quality assurance is important, implementing different policies about the process, data protection, and so on and so forth. Because the singular impact affects operational activities and selling of the product. So in terms of practicality, when we design the service, our engineers organize the process in the process on the particular market. So particular market, particular customers, particular act, regulations, what are the consequences, how to serve the clients and how to serve the incidents when it happens. Because we of course can say that we are perfect, but remember we are humans, we make mistakes, but it is important to interact and to challenge these difficulties, not to hide, but talk to the customer and do it in the omni-channel way. In our organization, we sell electronic products in direct channel, online platform, and through distributors.
Sprzedaje przez
We
operatorów
sell through
telekomunikacyjnych.
telecom operators and so on and so forth. So there are different elements of connection. We are also supervised by Electronic Communication Office, Consumers and Competition Office. Of course, I'm talking about Poland, and it all affects how we will find ourselves on the market. So the egocentric element is client. Client is in the center, and we develop the dialogue with the customer. That's why we have, we address the needs of the client.
Dziękuję bardzo. I teraz, tak jak prosiłem Pani
Okay, thank you. And Professor, and I remember when we met 1 year ago. Okay, now I thought we want to operate online in the cloud, and I didn't expect you then at the meeting, Professor, because I thought that you are going to examine me. Tell us about the reality today. In academia, it's quite specific. On one hand, compliance meaning meeting the rules and regulations, and scientific data, so breaking the rules, are not in concordance. So how to teach students to conduct on the experiments to break or not to break the compliance? Where are the borders of the studies? Today we don't know where they are, especially if we are talking about genetic studies or bioengineering. AI, it tackles a lot of questions and challenges where we are in terms of ethical aspects. Remember that ethical aspects are important here. And the answer is quite tricky. If we don't do it, someone else will, and they will gain advantage. And it's not only the question for academia, but the question to all of us, where is the limitation? And I remind our discussion about provisions and regulations. What's the difference between three main areas? In States, we have innovation, China, industrialization, Europe, regulation. And that's the main association. And thanks to regulations, we are safer, closer to the mechanism of compliance. We live in a safe way, but do we really win this race? Or how long have we been losing? We have been losing this race. So we should wake up. Do we want to wake up from the dream and be convinced that all of these rules and regulations and provisions have some limits? Maybe it's all about over-regulation. Because when we look at all company or national compliance, because the word compliance can be replaced with other words, but we talk about one notion. There is a classical question: what is the goal of the regulation. Regulation is to improve competitiveness. Is it still the case? Good question. Today we can't answer it uniformly, but of course environmental protection is a case. If we only competed, then we would have to wear masks because of the pollution. If we allowed AI, teach AI about AI, so wouldn't it be the more effective way of teaching about AI? Probably, yes. The question is if it would be ethical. The answer is no. That's why we need to choose between ethics and being competitive. So, if we teach young people, young researchers, well, then they will realize their future studies, and that's huge responsibility. But we don't have answer to the question, what is the limitation? And we need to have compliance that is present, that we should comply to. But on the other hand, we cannot lose this race with the areas that treat our values in a different way.
When you talked about it, I had a thought. Today, I will have a favor to ask you of. I heard that you get access to the best AI model. Can you share a token? Only 8 companies in the world has access to it right now, so it's quite valuable. So here we're dealing with another issue. And that's a question to all of you. How much your clients, students, professors, in your view, understand the value and what's happening with their data? I once read a study in which said that 80% of clients would willingly share their data if that would mean earning some loyalty points or some winnings, some awards. This is how our loyalty program was born. And then moving on to security, clients don't like sharing their data. When we introduced online in 2018, online services in 2018, we got a whole list of data from the regulator that the client needs to give us. And, there's always a problem of complete anonymity in sale points, because we can go to Żabka, to our brick and mortar shop, and just anonymously buy a ticket, a lottery ticket. And to use the tool that everyone carries in their pocket right now, a phone, you need to give a great amount of data, and then verify yourself through a bank, through mObywatel, or a scan of your ID. So quite a lot of information, and the shock that these two channels, the difference between these two channels, I would say, is still painful for our clients. We keep explaining them why is it so, that this is for their safety. For the data to protect us and the market in general. And it's difficult if the product is so, I don't want to say trivial, but it's almost like staple foods, like a bubblegum, a lottery ticket, I mean. And we require so much data, just like a bank. And this is something that my company struggles with on an ongoing basis. So clients don't like sharing their data, that's for sure. Sometimes they are tempted by the accumulation of funds, sometimes by loyalty points, but in general we keep explaining them why do we need to collect the data. It's called the paradox of privacy. This what you talked about. Of course, Totalizator has their statistics, results, but it's interesting to check other studies. It turns out that 20% of us, because of this, this monetization of data, is willing for a simple, well, not a lot of money, like free coffee, for example, or some kind of loyalty program incentive. We are willing to send our data to the network, and then we're starting to doubt it when we need to fill out a form. So that's an interesting paradox. On the other hand, 70% of Poles don't know who processes their personal data. Or you can say it differently, only 30% of Poles know who processes their personal data. Choose a pessimistic or optimistic option. Speaking about numbers, it's astonishing for me. But it's not that bad, because in Europe it's 80 to 20% ratio. So I'm not sure if we should be happy about it or not. The skill or lack of education. We don't want to understand, we don't need to understand. But yes, I would focus on we don't want to understand what can happen with this information. Of course, we are afraid to provide our data to the bank because they steal, right? And we are not afraid to share our data with Starbucks because, well, after all, it's free coffee, right? So that's the first paradox that we have, I would say. Secondly, is the traditional cognitive dysfunction. 70% of people declares that they understand the processes of personal data. Only 20-25% of people read these clauses, agreements, and so on. So 40% of people get lost somehow. At least the rest of this 30%. They don't know, they don't read. Just like Isaac Asimov said, there are two categories of people. I think, therefore I am, and I don't think, and I still am. And I would say 30% of people is this in this case, in this category, and they live happily, maybe not ever after, but still they live. And the problem of knowledge and thinking what is the data worth? Not a lot of people know, not a lot of people appreciate that. I think data analysts that do monetize the data models, AI models, know that the best. And they have all those markers. We are happy as researchers when we have access to that data. That is given to us by the users in good faith, of course, and then we are using it with good faith, building proper models, of course. But then we need to still remember why, what for, and be aware of that. And we're reaching the transparency of the contract that was mentioned already. How to shorten a 60-page loan conditions, mortgage conditions, contracts, and so on. The one that thinks or knows that or will figure out a way, a solution, will revolutionize the world. I think the majority was articulated here. I will just give 2-3 points here in terms of answer. First, data is a modern oil in contemporary meaning. We know about the energy crisis, so data is oil. Certain discussion that Professor Oko mentioned, we're not aware of certain things here. Like, for example, there are software providers that give you free email address. And we say it's free, but how is it free? Like, what does it mean? And again, another element that I would like to refer here, what is the data that we can use and how we can use it? And to show you the positive side, to show you that, well, there are big corporations that want your data, want to use your data. A well-prepared and processed data, for example, anonymized data, can be a basis for us creating either new models or new services. A good example here could be what my organization did. For example, live translation. It is possible only because we were able to teach AI algorithms or machine learning algorithms to create proper models, to train them, to give them proper components, and to make those services more usable. If we provide services about, let's say, better assessment of CT scans, so the algorithm would help us to assess those. We need to have data, of course, anonymized data, but still. And I would like to talk about that because I think we don't speak enough. We say that data is a fuel. Yes, they cost a lot, and we have data leaks as well, but we need to remember that data is the basis to create new services, to create new solutions, new, better models that are then going to be helping us as a society. And let me give an example. As an organization, we created a solution that in the medical world is called Holter. If you have or used to have a problem with tension, hypertension, you know that probably this device allows you to analyze, to gather medical data, and it sends it to the cloud in an anonymized way. And a doctor that gets the information from the algorithm has a predefined areas selected. So the doctor would make decision that he would say we have bradycardia, tachycardia, and so on. But it happens because we can anonymize data, use the data, and we can allow the doctor to shorten the time they need to describe that study, that given test, and to provide diagnosis faster. Okay, in the context of the banking sector, I think I would divide the data into two categories. First, usability of the product. So the one that is supposed to serve the return on investment, let's say, or interest rate. And then the second is about the personal data of our clients. And of course, the goal of processing the latter data is clearly defined, so we don't have a lot of freedom in it. So the limit here is quite clear. And the paradox that the professor mentioned, I also have the pleasure of conducting classes with students, and when I ask my students who read a policy of data transfer, and these are students of security faculty, maybe 1-2 people would say that they opened the first page, and that's it. And then we also say that the mission of our public trust services, we are reluctant to send our data to public trust services. And I think this is because of lack of education. And this is a paradox, as Professor said. If we don't start doing it, Tomasz mentioned it before, that if we don't start educating people, then we will have these kind of situations like prescriptions available in public domain, for example, and then it will definitely be used by those people who are wanting to use it for malicious purposes, like, for example, Medicaid data available in darknet. It's a lot more valuable than you said 5 zlotys. So this is something that is developing, definitely. So, Professor, over to you. I wanted to note, it might sound funny, but it's not very funny. When we talk about data collection, something that we can find in darknet and something that we don't discuss often enough, we need to realize that since this is already pseudonymized or anonymized, we believe that what happens in darknet is real. How much is it manipulated? And maybe there are organizations that, openly speaking, like APD, that build for us, for the researchers in Europe, in the US, build slightly disfigured data so that our models are wrong. How to check it? Well, difficult, of course, but then where should we get this real data from, true data from? And then, of course, we're coming back to certain openness, so pseudonymization rather than anonymization. And I think this is something that us, as society, as civilization even, we need to deal with somehow, because otherwise we will get lost in it.
Okay, thank you for the answer. And as Agentic AI should be a part of each conference. Agentic AI should be as part of each conference, but maybe we can discuss AI agents during the coffee break. And the last minute is to summarize the panel in a very particular way.
Żeby każdy z nas dał jedno zdanie, jedną radę dla, powiedzmy, prezesa firmy albo dla C-suite, co teraz trzeba zrobić, co w tych czasach trzeba zrobić i może jakaś literatura, zasoby, z których panowie czerpią wiedzę. Ja mogę powiedzieć,
from my perspective,
jakbym chciał polecić jedną książkę,
if I wanted to recommend one book, because I believe that empathy, emotional intelligence are weaknesses of AI,
z konkretnego zakresu zawsze mówił 37,
because
ale to już pomijając takie rzeczy.
they answered particular question, not Neckerman, visiting pastors and soul, how we operate in this life of AI, what can we do with the awareness, but what is your advice for board members? Where do you take your knowledge from?
Okej, to ja też polecę książkę.
I will recommend a book,
Why Nations Fail.
Why Nations Fail.
Książka o tym,
The
jak
book
budować
about
instytucje i dlaczego
building
instytucje są
institutions
ważne,
and
bo
why
instytucje
they
są
are
ważniejsze
important.
niż ludzie w długim terminie.
Because long term
I
they are more
również
important
w
than
świecie
people,
korporacyjnym.
especially if we talk about
To ja
corporations.
2 słowa, myśleć krytycznie, a
Critical
jeżeli chodzi o
thinking,
książkę, to
this is
powiedziałbym
important.
może trochę prowokacyjnie
Book, provocatively
do tego myślenia
speaking,
krytycznego Buktechy pani Sylwii
book
Czubowskiej.
by Sylwia Czubowska.
Patrząc na kolegów, którzy
Looking at
może gdzieś są dotknięci tym,
colleagues who may
ale
be
naprawdę
offended by
warto
that.
przeczytać.
I know you're smiling, but you should read the book.
Ja bym powiedział tak, że dzisiaj to, czym nie mieliśmy okazji porozmawiać, czyli AI jest elementem, który dzisiaj de facto narzuca nam pewien schemat działania.
Schemes and how we should act, but we signaled one thing about cloud methods, so new threats stemming from vulnerability analysis. If you don't know that, you should read about it because this is the game changer. We people who are in cyber business, we say that this is the atomic bomb if what the press is writing about. And if that is true, especially what we heard about Pegasus, this is nothing compared to that. So the big scandal in Pegasus, but maybe you should read more about it. In terms of the books, I would recommend creative thinking. So the book
kreatywnego myślenia i poszukiwania odpowiedzi na wiele pytań i wyjście z takiego modelu out of the box. I tą metodologię my tworzymy i używamy
We use it
w naszej
in
organizacji.
our
Jesteśmy z niej bardzo
organization
dumni.
and we are proud of that.
3 słowa, żeby się zastosować, musimy łączyć
And we
kropki
need
i
to
nowy
connect different
strategiczny
dots.
algorytm
New
polski,
strategic
Rajmund
algorithm
Andrzejczak, Sławomir
should be
Dębski. To moim zdaniem
used.
takie holistyczne
This
podejście.
is
Dziękuję.
the holistic approach.
Dziękuję bardzo. Było
So
super.
combining thoughts. Thank you for your contribution to the discussion.